Hi, everyone. This is Rose Armour, and thank you for joining us for the Closing SDNCS Social Innovation Fund Award webinar. Your phones have been muted on entry, so if you have comments or questions, please post them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If your chat box is not showing, you can click on the speech bubble at the top right-hand side of your screen, and that will open it up. If you're viewing this webinar on a smartphone or a tablet, there are certain functions that may not be working or may not work for you, so just a heads up. We'll be recording today's webinar, and it'll be available and posted on the Knowledge Network in about a week. It usually takes about a week to do that. So I would like to welcome the Office of Grants Management team. We have a much more robust team now, and so I'd like to introduce the new staff. We have Lisa Bishop, who most of you should know. We have Rachel Turner, who has been on staff for about a month and a half or so now, maybe a little bit more. And we have Alex Delaney, who has been on staff for about 3 weeks, I believe. So welcome, and I will turn it over to Lisa, and she'll start the webinar.
Thank you, Rose. It's great to be here, and we're really excited for you to meet two of our new staff in our office who are supporting the Social Innovation Fund. We actually have a third person, Stephen Mazzola, who had a conflict this afternoon, but he's going to try to join us for the end. Nonetheless, know that we're all very committed to supporting the Social Innovation Fund, especially those of you who are now starting to get towards the end of your award and trying to figure out what to make sense of as far as the closeout process. Today, we're really going to talk about the requirements for all of the corporation's cost reimbursement grants, of which SIF grants are. We are going to highlight some special things that we think are of particular importance for the Social Innovation Fund, especially as you may be preparing maybe a little bit down the road to do the closeout. I would ask that you keep all of your questions to the end. You go ahead and submit them if you want, but then as far as asking them, we'll do that at the end. And try to keep them general so that they apply to everyone who's on the webinar as well. If you have specific questions, either programmatic or financial about your grant and how it may be impacted by closeout, feel free to reach out to your program officer or your grants officer. Next slide. Next slide. So one of the things, if you haven't already done this, and this really doesn't matter where you are in your grant at this point, if you haven't already done a written closeout policy, both for your award as an intermediary and for your subrecipients, this would be a great time to do so. There's some key things we want to call out as a part of that. One is making sure that you have a reporting process for the financial and programmatic things that you'll need that are specific to closeout. Some of those are very similar to what you've been doing throughout your award. However, there are some things that you'll just want to make sure you capture as part of the cumulative closeout of your award. One of the other things you'll want to make sure you do is make sure that the information is all supported by documentation. This is particularly important, and we've seen this even with some of our SIF grants that have already begun the closeout process. You may have staff that are with the project for the majority of the time and then transition either right before the end or right afterwards, and you may still be trying to tie up some loose ends. And so to the extent that you can make sure that you capture everything from the people who have it firsthand and capture it in writing, the better off you'll be. Make sure that you have a process for reviewing both your information and the subgrantees so that you can reconcile the financial reports and also follow up on any closeout items programmatically. Make sure that you are aware of our record retention policy and that you have your own as well. That can certainly be longer than ours, but it needs to be at least equivalent to ours. And then as you think about your subrecipient closeouts, make sure that you back out when you need stuff from them so that there's enough time for you to submit everything to us within the 90-day window following the end of your grant. Next slide. We really want to highlight that while closeout is a compliance activity, there's also some other benefits to it as well, both for you all and for us. It is an opportunity to really document what exactly happened in the project. There's going to be some things that probably didn't go as planned, but hopefully there's a lot of things that did go as planned. And hopefully there are also some successes that maybe you weren't intending at the beginning but are an outgrowth of the project, especially given the nature of the Social Innovation Fund. So really see this as an opportunity and not just an exercise of checking boxes, that it really is kind of the cumulative record of what the grant was that will live on with you all as well as with us long past the end of the grant. One thing that you'll notice that we often do is we make sure that the financial and programmatic reports are due to us at the same time. We think it makes it easier even if there are different people doing those reports. We would encourage you to do the same thing with your subgrantees as well. So what is grant closeout? It is literally the process by which we work with you as the pass-through entity to make sure that you've completed all of your activities and that you can certify that your subrecipients have done the same. For those of you who are under the uniform guidance, the citation is 2 CFR 200-343. Most of what we're going to talk about today, and the process that you'll experience with us comes straight from there. I think it's one of the more clear-cut processes that we have. It's really meant to be straightforward, to be easy. If you do run into challenges, we'll certainly work with you. I think one of the highlights that we want to put out there is that you have 90 days from the last day of your project period to complete all the closeout activities. So once all of your programmatic activities are completed, once you have obligated all of your funding that you intend to spend, you have 90 days to actually reconcile all of that, to submit all reports to us. If you're getting close to the end of the grant and you realize you're going to need more time than that, reach out to your grants officer and ask for a no-cost extension. We need to do that before the end of the grant period. That is literally to complete those programmatic activities. It's not because you need to make sure that all of your funding is liquidated or anything like that. That can happen during the closeout period. But if you do feel like you're going to be needing additional time, the sooner you can let us know that, the better. We'll work very closely with your program officers to get that in place for you as quickly as possible. So what are some of the responsibilities? Make sure that you pay any of those outstanding obligations that you incurred before the end of the project period. Close out all of your subgrants if you haven't already. Make sure that you enter the final federal financial report, or FFR, and E-grants. Return any unobligated funds. And then to try to demystify what the financial reconciliation literally looks like, we look at those final expenditures in your FFR that you submit to us through E-grants, and then what is the final quarterly report that you submit to the payment management system, which is going to have your advances and your disbursements. So they don't actually call it a final FFR in the payment management system. It's just another quarterly one that covers that period of time at the end of your grant. And again, we can help you navigate that if need be, but that's actually a separate report to them. And our job on this is to make sure that those three sets of numbers can reconcile. And then if there's any funding left over, we will de-obligate the funding and it goes back to Treasury. So we try to watch that as it gets close to the end of the grant, because that's not our preference, and we assume it's not your preference either. So there are three certifications for SIF awards that are really important. One is the Subgrantee certification, and we're going to go into a lot more detail about that in just a few minutes. The other two is an equipment certification, and this is if you or any of your subgrantees still have a single unit of equipment with a value of $5,000 or more per unit. So this is very rare for our grants, but there are some cases where people may have purchased a vehicle or specific equipment, and then in order to retain that, you actually need to get the corporation's approval as part of the closeout process. So we've had a couple of those requests come in, and so we've been able to deal with them. Just know that that's really important for the equipment certification. If you don't have any, you just submit either via email or letter or form saying that you certify you don't have any equipment with an individual unit value of more than $5,000. And then the third certification we need is for residual supplies. And again, this is both for you and for any of your subs who have residual supplies with a fair market value, aggregate value of $5,000 or more. And so if you have any questions about what would be considered equipment or residual supplies, you reach out to your grants officer. We will help we'll work through that, we'll negotiate it, we'll see if we can help you set that up well in advance. I would also say for the equipment, all equipment purchases should have been previously approved by the corporation. So if you think you may have one that wasn't, let us know. We'd rather work through that sooner rather than later. We do have some mechanisms to handle that, but that's part of the closeout process, is that we'll actually be saying, did you or your subgrantee have approval for that equipment in advance? And if not, we'll take the action we need to work with you to get that resolved. So those are the three certifications that you need to close out SIF grant. And then the final financial report, which becomes, again, it's a cumulative report. We really want to look at the total funds that were awarded, both federal and on the grantee share. And then we want to make sure that you should make sure that you are able to back that up, just like with all of your other FFRs, with whatever documents in your accounting system that the numbers reconcile. For us, the final FFR is the final record of the financial expenditures on your grant. So that is what will reside in the corporation system. It's what we'll look at to say, did you meet your match? Did your subrecipients meet your match? And then we want to make sure that there are no unexpended funds held by your subrecipients. So again, hopefully you're going through some of these exercises with your intermediary reports with them, but if not, let us know. We'll help you figure out the best way to do it. And then depending on what the situation is, your subrecipients may owe you money and or you may owe us money as part of that closeout process. And if this is concerning or unclear to you, let us know and we'll help you set that up to the best of our abilities in advance. I think there's also some good examples out there. Finally, I would just say make sure that you have the appropriate signatories both at the subrecipient level and at your level signing off, verifying those expenses, the match, and any documentation. It's much, much better to do this while you've got all the people who were involved on a daily basis still there and still engaged with the process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. So Lisa did mention briefly the match component of the closeout, and I want to take a little bit of a closer look at that match aspect of the award and how it relates to closeout and preparing the final financial report, and where the responsibilities for that lie. So the intermediary organization is ultimately responsible for meeting the overall required match of the award as well as the total match of the subawards, and that's for the entirety of the award period, not just for an individual budget year. This differs from the subgrantee or subrecipient responsibility, which is to meet their own match levels on an annual basis, so only that individual year and not the entire grant period as a whole. Once the reconciliation of the financial report is completed, as Lisa mentioned, you'll need to determine if funds need to be returned, so either from the subgrantee to the intermediary or from the intermediary back to CNCS. Next slide. So let's move on to a general overview of the subgrantee closeout process in a little bit more detail. The intermediary organization will need to develop a process for closing out their subgrants that includes the 4 actions included on this slide. So firstly, verifying the completion of program and financial requirements by the subrecipients, reconciling funds expended and payments made, which we'll go into a little bit more detail about shortly, ensuring that the proper match has been met, and accounting for equipment and supplies as necessary. And these follow the same general guidelines that Lisa mentioned with overall award closeout as well. So the closeout process is an opportunity for the grantee to conduct a final review and ensure that the information is complete and accurate, as information from the subgrantees is a very critical component of meeting both CNCS and SIF-specific reporting requirements. It might make it easier for you all to use closeout forms that are similar to what the corporation requires. However, that's not necessary as long as all the same information is included in your closeout process. There's a link on the slide to an example of some of the closeout forms, as well as there are a number of samples on the Knowledge Network. All right, so let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into one of those steps, reconciling the subgrant. So there are 4 main steps that you'll need to go through during this process, starting with reconciling all expenditures, match, and payments in order to ensure that the disbursements are equal to expenditures. So intermediaries will need to work with the subgrantees, subrecipients that have received excess funds in order to have them returned, that if the funds dispersed are greater than the expenses. You'll need to review the match levels to ensure that the overall requirements have been met, and if that's not the case, expenses may need to be adjusted in order to create the appropriate match level. Collect any residual supplies and or equipment. We've spoken to that already. And as a final note, if you are a pay-for-success intermediary, I just wanted to note that you won't have to complete the subgrant closeout process for service recipients, only any subgrant or subrecipients that you have. Okay. And with that, I will pass it off to Rachel.
All right, and so when you've completed all of your closeout activities and everything has been finalized on our end, on the end of CNCS, you'll receive written notification. And, you know, just to reiterate a couple key points from our presentation, again, remember you have a total of 90 days to complete all closeout activities. So it is within 90 days of your grant expiration date, not your, you know, next FFR. I know in the past we've seen some confusion around that, but 90 days within that expiration date to complete all closeout activities. In addition, Lisa mentioned our record retention policy. After you've completed closeout of your grant, please remember you must retain all records related to your grant for up to 3 years. And then finally, I encourage all of you to go onto the Knowledge Network. We've mentioned some of the tools that are available on there, such as the Subgrantee Closeout Form. I think that that could be really useful for you as you close out with your subgrantees. And so finally, with that, we're going to move on to the next slide here for some questions and answers. So please feel free to go ahead, as Lisa mentioned, if you have general questions you think could be applicable to everybody, please share those with us now. If you have other questions that are more specific to you, feel free to reach out to your grants officer after the presentation.
Okay, so if you have questions, please post those in the chat, sending it to all participants or all, if you don't have all participants, you can send it to all presenters. And let's see what questions people have. Additionally, as the grants officers have been talking about the Knowledge Network, they are referring to both the SIF Knowledge Network, and some of those resources can also be found, or can only be found, on the CNCS Knowledge Network. And you would get to that by going to doing a search on the CNCS page. So we try not to duplicate too much of those resources. So if you don't find it on the SIF Knowledge Network, please look on the CNCS Larger Knowledge Network. Okay, do we have any questions? Can you talk about problems you've seen with closeouts in the past?
So great question. I can offer one, and maybe there's some others as well in the room. I think one thing is not having a clear sense of what you need to do before you get to that point, and hopefully you're kind of looking at the progress all along, and your program officer and grants officer are helping you do that. But as you, we've had people who come up right up to the end of the grant and either not realize they had a huge amount of money left over, particularly because the FFRs are semi-annual up until that point, and so there could be a lot of things that could happen that last 6 months of the grant. But you may not be tracking the spending, and then we're really stuck, and we really do at that point have no if you don't get that no-cost extension, we have no other option but to return the money to Treasury. So that's something that we really hate to do. That doesn't benefit any of us collectively. I think another big thing is making sure that you have all of the documentation together. And again, I think some of what we've shared are not hypotheticals. They're very real lessons learned, not just from some of the SIF awards, but others where you may have people transitioning as projects wind down and capturing as much as you can from them, especially for folks who may have been involved in the day-to-day level and then start to transition out of that role, which is a natural part of the evolution. But I think you need to make sure that you've got as much as possible while it's fresh for them.
Sure, and this is Rachel. Another thing that we've seen, I think it's great, many of you use the data supplement that's provided by your program officer, and in there you'll track sub-awards in more detail. And so we've seen in the past sometimes, you know, folks will use that data supplement and, you know, they might not always update eGrants. Please remember, eGrants is our official system of record, and so when we close a grant, that final FFR that you submit must reflect, you know, sort of reality, if you will. So if, for example, we have a lot of folks that like to use that data supplement to track what they're doing, it's important that you make sure that if you are doing that, if you're using that data supplement, that you're making the appropriate adjustments in eGrants so that eGrants, our official system of record, you know, at the end, when we close out, reflects, you know, all of the actual balances and not just estimates.
Any other lessons learned? Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay. If all funds are expended prior to the project period end, is closeout deadline still 90-day period from the end versus from the final expenditure?
Great question. So you are entitled to have that full 90 days following the end of the project period to close out your grant. That's something that you know, you are absolutely entitled to that. However, if you are ready to close it out early, both you know, financially and programmatically, we're happy to do that. And depending on how early it is, we could think about actually doing an amendment to change the end date, or we might just work with you on the closeout. But you know, you're not beholden to take the whole 90 days. And if you're ready to do it sooner, then obviously it lessens the exposure you have through potential risk by keeping the grant open open just in general, but we don't want to shortchange you those 90 days. In fact, we can't shortchange you those 90 days, and some people need the full 90 days for very good reason.
Great. Do we have any more questions? We'll also be sending out with the materials. We can send out resources that we created last year. We have a closeout checklist and a 2-page overview of the closeout process. So we'll make sure to get those out. So we have another question. Oh, nope, that's just a reminder to put your questions in the chat box. So if you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So you've got 3 grants officers here to answer all your questions. So now's your chance.
Hi, Rose. Here's a question that was sent to the host. Can SIF share with us their procedures or timeline, or when will our program officer begin working with us to establish a timeline?
So it's definitely a shared, this is Lisa, it's definitely a shared responsibility between your program officer and grants officer. We typically will start connecting as you get into that final year. We work pretty closely with the program officers as it gets closer to the end to start talking about that and make sure you have the information you need. Formally, we usually won't do anything until you're actually at that beginning of that closeout period as far as notifications and things like that. But I would say if you're approaching your final year, it's a good time to start asking your program officer. We'll certainly follow up with them and kind of make sure we're all still in sync on that process. But generally, it'll be part of your check-ins and things like that with the program officer, and then if there's specific questions related to some of the more financial elements or whatever, they'll reach out to us and pull us in, and we'll get you whatever resources and support you need. The earlier the better. This is one where I think going into the last few months of your grant in particular, if you know exactly what needs to be done, you've got a very good sense of where your expenditures are going to be, the more we'll be able to help you through those final months.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Don't hesitate to ask. I know that there's been a lot of questions about closeout, so if you have a question, somebody else probably has the same question, so don't be shy. I have not yet reviewed the Knowledge Network. Are there good documents related to process that are best practices? I'm not sure we have process. We do have an overview of the closeout process, but it's not really a programmatic process type document.
And I know we also feature a video as well, but again, it's not a programmatic document.
Yeah, there are sample forms that you can use with your subrecipients and things like that. If there are questions about the process, reach out to your grants officer and we'll connect with your program officer and see what we can do to try to help you come up with something. And part of this is where some of it's going to depend on how your organization treats closeouts in general for subrecipients, if that's where this is kind of focusing. But we're certainly happy to help you if there's something that you don't see that you think would be useful as you start to think about the closeout process. We'll see if we can help create at least some sort of template or something that would be valuable to multiple people.
So Stephen, I'm going to put you on the spot. We just had Stephen join us, and the grants officers were sharing their problems and challenges they've seen with closeout in the past. So do you have any insight or thoughts on past closeout challenges?
Well, first off, happy SIF Week, everybody. Great to read all of your stories and find out all the great things that you're doing. I just completed my first month here, so pretty much all past is prologue for me. And so I look forward to working with everybody. I actually just spent the past 72 hours going into a little bit more detail about the role of closeouts and not surprised that there are some questions, but with this team, there will always be answers. So be patient with us, but we'll get back to you soon.
Great. So we have a question. Can you please talk some more about the adjustments on subgrantee expenses due to them not meeting the match?
So this is something that I believe the program officers review as part of the data supplement as that's submitted. So again, that shouldn't be something that should be an issue at the very end. It shouldn't be a surprise at the very end unless there's been some sort of challenge in that final year. We can double check that with them just to make sure. If there is an issue, you know, we'll work through it with you and we'll figure out what to do. It's going to depend on the specifics of the situation.
Okay. How likely will the grant be audited?
We wish we knew that too. I think it's important to know that this is a good example of where the corporation isn't the final authority on our award. So you have our Office of Inspector General, you potentially have the Government Accountability Office, and you might have your independent single auditor as well that could be looking at this grant either at the time of closeout or for a period of time thereafter. So it's just something that we try to prepare for. We want to make sure, again, while that grant is still open before we've actually hit the close button on it, that all of your records are as tight as possible, all of our records are as tight as possible, and that your risk of audit, and I should say audit findings, particularly because you can get audited and not have findings, is as low as possible. If you have any questions or concerns, better to ask early and often, and we'll do the best we can to work with you. But I wish we could say, what the risks were as far as that goes.
Great. So we have another question. My understanding is that if we're working with a consultant and the work is almost all done by grant end and will be finished during the 90 days, can we call that obligated? Or does the work have to be totally done by grant end?
So great question. That all of the programmatic activities have to be done by that end date. So this is an example where we have this, this does happen for a number of reasons. So if you think you're going to have activities stretch beyond whatever that project period and budget period end date is, let us know. We'd much rather do a no-cost extension. It's something that we do fairly regularly here. We can do it for up to a year without really any extra effort. If you need more than a year, again, hopefully we know that sooner rather than later, and that there are a few more steps on our end, but that's also something that we've entertained on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? Here comes one. Are no cost extensions requested via eGrants?
Great question. So what we ask that you do is that you send a written request via email is fine to both your program officer and grants officer. We can send out as part of the follow-up. We'll send out some of the specifics that we need in that no-cost extension request. Basically, we want to know, obviously, when you think you'll need the request to, what activities will be done, and then anything around the expenditures. And so we'll try to get you some additional information as part of the follow-up on that. And then from there, what we'll do is we'll initiate an amendment for you and take it through the process that you're familiar with as far as amendments or awards. But actually just sending it to us via email is the best way to do it.
Great, thank you. Do we have more questions? Give it a minute to see if any last-minute questions come in. So as we said, we'll send out the closeout checklist. We'll send out the 2-page overview. If you have a request, you can reach out to your PO or your grants officer if you need something specific, more specific for your grant. And all of the grants officers and program officers are available and ready for your questions. So please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm not seeing any final questions, any final thoughts from Office of Grants Management. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your participation in today's webinar. Hopefully this has been informative and you've gotten some new information. Like I said, if you have specific questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the presenters or to your PO. Thank you. Have a good day.